Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is Herzog. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of Herzog with leather cover, designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself, if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Herzog is a 1964 novel by the Canadian-American writer Saul Bellow. Bellow is one of the most recognized writers. Officially, he has won Nobel, Pulitzer, and various National Book Awards. He was a prolific writer, and there is an assemblage of some great works produced by him. If you ever listen to Bellow, he seems to be one of these super smart, very articulate people, knowing exactly what's and why's for his doings, but he always underplays it. There is an interview with him from the 80s where he was asked about death. I don't know for what reason I appeared on the face of the earth. All I know is that it was a marvelous and exhilarating experience. That to exist itself is a glorious thing. I don't know how it will end. I don't have any answers. Just a feeling that is not the end. There is that European intellectual, even bourgeois side about Saul Bellow, even though he was born in Canada and lived most of his life in the US. His parents were recent immigrants from St. Petersburg, Russia, where they did enjoy an upper middle class lifestyle, and maybe it rubbed off on him. The retrospective was strong in me because of my parents. They were both full of the notion that they were failing. They had been prosperous cosmopolitans in St. Petersburg. My mother could never stop talking about the family dacha, her privileged life, and how all that was now gone. She was working in the kitchen, cooking, washing, mending. What is Herzog about? It is your typical and traditional midlife crisis many men go or used to go through in their 40s. Nowadays, the age bracket might have expanded and the gender might be more inclusive. The new 40s is the old 30s, says Charlie Harper from 2.5 Men to a bartender. And she replied, not the way you live, pal. Anyway, it is reminiscence on one's own life and a search for new identity and purpose for the second and final part, hoping to avoid the mistakes of the former and combined with fear that time is running out, appearing somewhat desperate and hectic. You have to fight for your life. That's the chief condition on which you hold it. A bit of the plot. The plot is a few days in the life of Moses Herzog, an academic in his late 40s, going through psychological crisis after his second divorce. He writes a series of letters to people he knew, knows, or would like to know, and puts out things he feels he should have said or would like to say. He had fallen under a spell and was writing letters to everyone under the sun. He was so stirred by these letters that from the end of June he moved from place to place with a valise full of papers. Herzog is in his rural house in Massachusetts and wallows in anger and self-pity because his second wife, Madeleine, left him for another man, Valentine Gershbach, who he considered a close friend. He decides to go to New York to see a woman, Ramona, he recently met. He stops in Martha's Vineyard to see some friends and then arrives in New York where he spends a pleasurable night with Ramona. The next day he goes to the courthouse to discuss with his lawyer the possibility of getting custody of his young daughter, June. While in the courthouse, he witnesses a case where a mother and her boyfriend are charged with abusing and killing her 3-year-old son. The proceedings make him apprehensive about his own daughter, so he devises a plan to fly to Chicago and rescue June. But the plan doesn't materialize the way he imagined it because of some new and unexpected events, and he returns to his house where he starts to reflect on his possible future. And that's the basic plot. What are my thoughts about Herzog? I like the Bellow style of writing. He is an academic who often are accused of not living in the real world, analyze midlife crisis, and try to intellectually resolve their emotional problems. So things go on as before, with those who think a great deal and affect nothing, and those who think nothing evidently doing it all. But Herzog seems to try to maintain some balance between both. I think it is beneficial that the story is told from the intellectual's perspective, so besides events, there is also analysis and reflections which seem to make the theme more complete, in contrast to somebody just going through his existential crisis but not drawing any conclusions or even not recognizing it. To be fair, Herzog doesn't recognize it as such, but rather as suffering and punishment for the accumulation of mistakes and erroneous decisions. Considering his whole life, he realized that he had mismanaged everything. Herzog is portrayed as somewhat homeless, moving between hotels and houses of acquaintances, even though he has a rural property in Massachusetts. Perhaps this is to emphasize his psychological homelessness and in general being lost. He's also unemployed, living on the money he can gather or borrow. It seems all of it is to show the bottom he had reached, physical as a consequence of psychological and vice versa, and all of it was self-inflicted. What sort of character was it? Well, in the modern vocabulary, it was narcissistic, it was masochistic, it was anachronistic. His clinical picture was depressive, not the severest type, not a manic depressive. For me, Herzog is an equivalent of an alcoholic or a drug addict who lost it all and is a bum living on the street in a cardboard box, psychological cardboard box in the case of Herzog, raging at the world for his misfortunes with scanty moments of lucidity where he accepts some blame for his situation. And there also are moments of feeling somewhat cheery where he envisions the possibility of life being good again. But then the fear of the price he would have to pay for it appears. The novel is a self-analysis, but also the other main characters are deeply explored through Herzog's observations and reflections. Mostly women, the first wife Daisy, the second one Madeleine, his Japanese ex-lover, and the current one Ramona. I think the foundation of Herzog, the book, is the difficulty of the interhuman relationships. Maybe because our natural state is to be alone, which a lot of us don't like nor accept. Midlife crisis might be spurred by the realization that we really are alone, and it is usually caused by divorce or death. It also results from confusion, and it creates more confusion, but eventually the confusion lessens or maybe even goes away, and we return to the illusion of normality. Further, there is also implication of universal justice. Herzog didn't treat his first wife well, various affairs through the years in the countries he traveled to, plus a dose of venereal disease, and back at home, amorous adventure with a Japanese girl for whom he left his first wife, and then left her for Madeleine, his second wife, whom he treated much better, and in return she took him to the cleaners by freely and haphazardly spending his money, and in the end left him for his best friend, seemingly punishing him for his past sins, and she admitted she never loved him and never will. He was doing all he could to bring out the hidden Madeleine, the Madeleine he knew. As she stared at him, her color receded and her nose began to move very slightly. She seemed to realize that she must control her tic and the violence of her stare. But by noticeable degree, her face became very white, her eyes smaller, stony. He believed he could interpret them. They expressed a total will that he should die. This was infinitely more than ordinary hatred. It was a vote for his non-existence, he thought. Madeleine might be seen as some type of angel of justice. She seemed pretty religious and was a devoted Catholic before converting. She might also be seen as a symbol of continuation of persecution of Jews by the Christians. She slowly got all she could out of him, the house, daughter, and finally his friend, and once she has it all, she gets rid of him. Madeleine is an example of how complex and hard to understand for men women can be. They seem more calculating and cold, and in revenge they will prepare and wait for the opportune moment to strike. Also, you cannot reason with women, since many don't know how to reason. But not all in Herzog's life is gloom and doom. There is his relationship with Ramona, something that gives him a bit of hope for the future. He sees her as a pleasurable asylum away from his daily hassle, but he also knows a pleasant asylum can become a dark dungeon, so he proceeds slowly and with caution, not wanting to be burned again, which makes Ramona, who comes across as a type of manhunter, a bit eager. He thinks of her as La Devoradora de Hombres, which means the devourer of men, and deep inside she is not that different from Madeleine. A bit more forward, bold, and even pushy, unlike a stereotypical woman. Actually, in their courtship, Ramona seems more manly than Herzog, which makes the latter more resistant. Maybe he liked being pursued and appreciated after the way Madeleine treated and discarded him, but at the same time, there's also fear, probably subconscious, of the painful repetition. He seriously considered marrying her, notwithstanding that he seemed just now to be buying a ticket to escape from her. Further, Herzog's fear might be based on the way Ramona was treating her ex-lover with total indifference. People think that opposite of love is hate, but in reality, hate is just another powerful emotion that can be transformed into love and vice versa. I guess that's where love and hate relationship comes from. It's fascinating that hatred should be so personal as to be almost loving. Well, maybe hate is the opposite of love, but where there is indifference, there is no hope. Anyway, Herzog probably fears that Ramona might be like Madeleine, willing to go far after the things she wants, but once she gets them, that's the end and she moves on. I think above all, Herzog is about life as suffering, or the pain one has to feel in it. The difficulty of maintaining somewhat straight course because of many difficult decisions we often have to make, and even if we avoid them, they will still impact our life in the long run. There also are the temptations that constantly cross our path and the events out of our control, incidents that we have to pay for. I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed, and what next? I get laid, I take a short holiday, but very soon after I fall upon those same thorns with gratification in pain or suffering in joy. Who knows what the mixture is? What good, what lasting good is there in me? Is there nothing else between birth and death but what I can get out of this perversity? Only a favorable balance of disorderly emotions? No freedom, only impulses? And what about all the good I have in my heart? Does it mean anything? Is it simply a joke? The letters seem to represent a listener, even psychologist, and they are part of Herzog's self-therapy. He expresses his disappointments at others or himself, and they are the key to self-analysis. The letters to people he knows are personal and relate to specific events, while the letters to the famous and not personal acquaintances are about the world's problems and how they contributed to them. And further, he links them to his own struggle and suffering. Dear Herr Nietzsche, my dear sir, humankind lives mainly upon perverted ideas. Perverted, your ideas are no better than those of Christianity you condemn. Any philosopher who wants to keep his contact with mankind should pervert his own system in advance to see how it will really look a few decades after adaptation. I send you greetings from this mere border of grassy temporal light and wish you happiness wherever you are. There's also Saul Bellow's ever-present Judaism and his influence on the novel. The strength of Judaism as a religion, since it is Madeleine who converts from Catholicism, even though she seems the more dominant party of the relationship. Besides the protagonist, there are a variety of Jewish characters, many of them presented as stereotypes. There's Herzog's faulty-mouthed, arrogant Jewish lawyer aka friend, who is angry, screaming at the world for his own suffering, and a frequent visitor to psychologists. He's a poor Jew with money, vulgar, loud, and obnoxious, with low morals. He seems to portray American Jews, who mostly descend from the Eastern European immigrants, traumatized by the pogroms and violent anti-Semitism. Further, his mother is presented as a typical Jewish mother, and the father as another typical Jew, tied with money, strict, constantly complaining, but also enterprising and persistent. He would change labels on the bottles of alcohol he served to the guests, so it looked he served better quality drinks. There are also Jewish brother, sister, uncle, and aunt reminiscing about the good old life in St. Petersburg. To sum it up, Herzog is a difficult book to read because of the complexities of its theme and how it is presented. It might be boring and daunting task to understand it for the people who can't relate to the character and his experiences, meaning it might be easier to swallow for the middle-aged folks. Also, the book is a compilation of many fragments going back and forward on the timeline. It seems unstructured and even chaotic, somewhat reminiscent of James Joyce's Ulysses, and some people even go as far as considering Herzog a remake of the former, but I don't know if I would agree with it. There is a certain originality about Bellow that can't be denied. If I was to compare Moses E. Herzog, it brings to mind Woody Allen and his films. There probably are many ordinary people that can be related to the novel's character, but they remain in obscurity. Also, there is some similarity to certain Joseph Conrad's protagonists if they were Jewish intellectuals. Somebody like Marlowe, who can be considered somewhat of Conrad's alter ego, just like a few people relate Moses Herzog to Saul Bellow and consider the novel somewhat autobiographical. This is based on a few parallels between the lives of the two. Both were Jewish and from Canada, born to Russian immigrants. Bootlegger father lived in Chicago, and at the time Bellow was writing the novel, he was divorced twice, just like Herzog. There are also further similarities between the other personalities and events in the book and Bellow's life, such as the second wife's affair with a friend. When asked about it, Bellow gave somewhat of a diplomatic or ambiguous answer, neither confirming nor denying it. I don't know that that sort of thing is really relevant. I mean, it is a curiosity about reality which is impure. Let's put it that way. Let's both be bigger than that. I don't think there are any direct adaptations of Herzog, since Bellow wasn't very enthusiastic about having his novels made into films. He was smart enough to know how badly most good books are massacred by the film directors. There are some Herzog-inspired plots, but they had to stay clear of any possible encroachments on the copyrights. This being said, I think previously mentioned Woody Allen, being Jewish and somewhat similar to Moses Herzog's character, might be the one to be able to do the best job of it, now that Bellow has been dead for a couple of decades. But perhaps Allen knows it would be too much for him at this age, even if he was allowed to have a shot at it. Actually, Allen and Bellow were somewhat of friends, and probably there were some pretty good reasons they never entertained the idea of doing a film. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paper bag which I transformed into a hardcover, leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A, naturally tan hide I buy from Tanner in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First, I designed the cover, which what I did here, I took the painting Self-Portrait by Picasso titled Man Riding. Actually, the man seems to be reflecting on his life, thinking what to put down on paper. I thought it could represent Herzog, thinking about his life and riding leathers. This is the back with the blurb, and inside from front cover, I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather-bound hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100. So if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100 but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel. And for every 100 donations, I will make a lottery and draw one name. And the winner will receive the book. So if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture. It smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you want one, don't snooze, or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.